My name is Claire Reed. I'm 42 years old, and I just learned that sometimes the people you trust most can become complete strangers overnight. Growing up, I thought I understood what family meant. My father worked 45 years as an aerospace technician building rockets for NASA. Never missed a day, never complained. When he retired, he had $400,000 saved. Not a fortune, but enough for dignity. Then my husband Eric's company started failing. Claire, he said one morning, papers spread across our kitchen table. Your dad could save us. It's an investment. He'll get everything back with interest. I watched my father sign that $400,000 investment agreement with the same steady hands that had built spacecraft. 3 years passed. This morning changed everything. I was packing school lunches when I transferred $80 for Dad's heart medication. Eric walked in, saw my phone screen, and his face went cold. $80? He said, reaching for our credit card. Are you your dad's ATM? Eric snapped the card in half. Sharp. Final. My children stopped eating, frozen by tension they couldn't understand. That's for Dad's heart medication, I whispered. But Eric didn't know one fact I knew everything. I knew that while he was denying $80 for Dad's medication, he'd been approving thousands for his mother's luxury electric car. Company money. Dad's retirement money. And there was another, more important fact. The precision and meticulousness of someone who designed rockets. That night, I didn't cry. Instead, I opened the folder Dad had left me, labeled Retirement Proof. Investment contracts, bank transfer records, board registration documents, and damaging evidence about Eric's company operations. Dad always used to say, leave proof. That's when I realized what I could do with these documents. If you're hearing this story, tell me in the comments. Where in the world are you listening from? Before we begin today's story, please don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. Now let's get started. The morning light filtered through the kitchen blinds as Claire Reed packed lunches for her 2 children. Her movements were automatic, practiced from years of routine. Peanut butter sandwich for Emma. Turkey and cheese for Jake. Apple slices in separate containers. On the counter beside her sat Walter's pill organizer, its compartments marked with days of the week. Next to it lay a Medicare Advantage card and a crisp EOB printout she had picked up from her father's condo the evening before. The numbers were getting harder to ignore. Her phone buzzed against the granite surface. A text from Walter, Dad's copay went up again. Claire exhaled slowly. She opened her banking app with the careful precision of someone performing surgery. The budgeting interface loaded, showing household expenses organized in neat categories. Groceries, utilities, kids' activities, and now, increasingly, Dad's medical costs. She navigated to the transfer screen. $80. Not a fortune by any measure, but in their current financial landscape, every dollar had to be justified, examined, approved. Her thumb hovered over the confirm button. It's $80, she whispered to herself. It's my dad. She pressed transfer. The kitchen filled with the sound of footsteps. Eric entered, already wearing his Bluetooth headset, finishing what sounded like a client call. His voice carried the rehearsed enthusiasm he used for business. Absolutely, we can deliver that timeline, he said, laughing with practiced charm. Consider it done. He ended the call and noticed Claire's phone screen still displaying the banking app. His expression shifted, becoming more focused, analytical. Without a word, he reached for his wallet and extracted their shared household card. The sound came next. A hard, deliberate click as Eric snapped the card into the cutting slot of his wallet case. The plastic separated cleanly. $80 isn't nothing, Eric said, his voice calm and measured. Is your dad's name ATM? Claire felt her mouth go dry. The words hung in the air between them like smoke. She looked at her children, who had frozen mid-bite, sensing the tension even if they didn't understand it. That's my dad's heart medication, she managed, keeping her voice steady through sheer force of will. Eric shrugged, the gesture casual and dismissive. I already send him dividends. $200 a month. That's more than generous for a man his age. Emma and Jake watched their parents with the wide-eyed attention children reserve for moments they know are important but cannot decode. Claire forced a smile in their direction and set down napkins with fingertips that trembled slightly. Eric reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a single, crisp $100 bill. He placed it on the kitchen table with the precision of a business transaction. "Groceries," he said. "Bring receipts. Like adults do." Claire stared at the money. The bill looked foreign on their family table, surrounded by lunchboxes and homework folders. She picked it up and folded it carefully, as if it were evidence of something she couldn't yet name. "Mom?" Emma's small voice cut through the silence. "Everything's fine, sweetheart," Claire replied, though the words felt hollow in her throat. The children finished breakfast in unusual quiet. Eric kissed Claire's cheek, a gesture that felt more like performance than affection, and left for work. The house settled into its normal rhythms, but something had shifted. That evening, Claire drove to Walter's condominium complex. The building was modest, clean, designed for seniors who valued maintenance-free living over luxury. She found her father sitting at his small kitchen table, a social security statement spread open beside a bottle of prescription pills. The amber plastic container sat like an accusation. Claire could see her father's name printed on the white label, along with dosage instructions and the pharmacy's logo. "Did he do it again?" Walter asked without looking up from his paperwork. Claire sat down across from him. The chair creaked slightly under her weight. "He did it in front of the kids." Walter's shoulders sank, but his eyes sharpened. He pushed back from the table and walked to a small filing cabinet in the corner of the kitchen. From the second drawer, he extracted a thick manila folder labeled in his careful handwriting, "Retirement Proof." "Then we stop surviving," he said, returning to the table with the folder. "We start documenting." He opened the folder, revealing layers of papers organized with military precision. Bank statements, investment agreements, correspondence. Each document had been hole-punched and secured with brass fasteners. "I kept everything," Walter said. "Every signature. Every promise. Every dollar that left my account." Claire felt something shift inside her chest. A sound echoed in her memory, the hard click of Eric's card cutter. But now, surrounded by her father's methodical record-keeping, that sound took on a different meaning. It was the sound of a decision being made. She reached for the first document in Walter's folder, her hands steady now. The paper felt substantial beneath her fingers, weighted with possibility. "Dad," she said quietly, "teach me what proof looks like." Walter smiled for the first time that day. "It looks like being ready." Outside, Tampa's evening traffic hummed in the distance. Inside the small condo, a 67-year-old retiree and his 42-year-old daughter began planning a war they hadn't known they were fighting. The pill bottle sat between them, no longer just a symbol of vulnerability. Now it represented something else entirely. It represented the beginning. 3 years earlier, Claire had sat at this same kitchen table in Walter's condo. The surface had been covered with retirement statements, tax documents, and a freshly printed 401k distribution notice that would change everything. Walter had pushed a pen toward her across the table, his expression grave. The weight of the moment had settled over them like winter air. "I'll save your family," he had said, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was offering. "But you leave proof. Every signature. Every dollar. Every promise." Now, in the present, Claire opened that same manila folder with trembling hands. The investment agreement lay on top, followed by board registration documents and bank wire confirmations. $400,000. The number still took her breath away. She ran her finger over the signatures, her own, Eric's, and Walter's careful cursive. The ink looked darker than she remembered, as if time had somehow intensified the commitment they had made. The front door opened with Eric's characteristic energy. He moved through the house like a man who had conquered something significant. The scent of expensive cologne preceded him into the kitchen, mixed with what Claire recognized as the particular satisfaction that came from victory. Eric held up his phone, scrolling to a local business website. The headline read, "Local entrepreneur overcomes adversity. Reed Technologies continues growth despite challenges." "I did it," he announced, his smile wide and triumphant. The article goes live tomorrow. 3-part series on resilient founders. Claire looked up from Walter's folder. The contrast struck her immediately, the careful documentation of her father's sacrifice beside Eric's celebration of his own success. "We did it," she corrected quietly. Eric's smile thinned. The change was subtle but unmistakable, like watching sunlight dim behind gathering clouds. Don't start with that, he warned, and his tone carried the same edge he used with employees who missed deadlines. He opened his laptop on the kitchen counter, revealing a meticulously organized spreadsheet titled Household Receipts Approved Expenses. The columns were color-coded: green for approved, red for rejected, yellow for pending review. New system, Eric explained, pointing at the screen. Submit everything by Sunday evening. If you miss the deadline, I freeze the account again. It's called accountability. Claire stared at the spreadsheet. Her name appeared in the header as expense submitter, while Eric's was listed as approval authority. The clinical language made their marriage sound like a business relationship between unequal partners. The following afternoon, Claire accompanied Walter to the senior center. The building was bright and welcoming, filled with the gentle sounds of conversation and activity. Nina Hart, the coordinator, met them at the reception desk with a warm smile and an armful of manila folders. "These are for you, Mr. Price," Nina said, handing Walter the folders. "Medicare Claims Organization. We'll help you sort through the EOBs and prescription receipts." They settled at a round table near the windows. Walter's hands shook slightly as he opened the first folder, revealing months of medical paperwork. Each document represented a choice between his health and his limited budget. "I don't want my daughter trapped," Walter said quietly, his voice barely audible over the soft chatter of other seniors. Nina looked at Claire with understanding. "Then don't let paperwork stay silent. Make it speak for you." That evening, Claire found herself studying Eric's behavior with new eyes. She watched him lock the drawer in his home office, something she had never noticed him do before. She observed how he changed passwords on shared accounts, always with explanations that sounded reasonable but felt controlling. His favorite phrase became company policy, applied to decisions about household spending, family activities, even conversations with neighbors. Everything required approval, documentation, justification. "Company policy," he would say when Claire suggested dinner out with friends. "We need to track entertainment expenses." Company policy, when she wanted to buy the children new clothes without submitting receipts first. Company policy, when Walter called during Eric's designated focus hours. Claire began making copies. It started small, photographing the investment contract pages when Eric wasn't home. Then she expanded to include board filing receipts and the bank fraud alert emails Eric had once begged her to ignore. She created a cloud storage folder named School Photos and uploaded everything there. Eric never questioned family pictures, never demanded access to her phone's photo gallery. The irony wasn't lost on her, hiding financial documents among images of their children's soccer games and school plays. Her banking app became a tool of documentation. She screenshot every transaction, every transfer, every declined charge. The evidence accumulated like sediment, layer upon layer of proof that their marriage had become a system of financial surveillance. Walter's folder expanded too. Nina helped him organize Medicare statements, prescription receipts, and correspondence with insurance companies. Each document told the story of a 67-year-old man navigating an increasingly complex healthcare system on a fixed income. "Look at this," Walter said during one of their evening sessions, pointing to a Medicare Advantage statement. "They changed the formulary. My heart medication isn't covered at the same level anymore." Claire calculated the difference in her head. An additional $40 per month. Nearly $500 per year. For a man living on Social Security, it might as well have been $5,000. She thought about Eric's cologne, his victory celebration, his business articles. She thought about the household expense spreadsheet and his casual dismissal of $80 for medication. "Dad," she said, "I want to understand everything in this folder. Every signature you made, every promise Eric gave you." Walter smiled sadly. "Then we'll start with the wire transfer. $400,000, sent to Reed Technologies on March 15, 3 years ago. Marked as investment. Promised as protection for your family's future." He pulled out a bank statement, pointing to the massive deduction from his retirement account. The number looked surreal beside the modest deposits and withdrawals that represented his normal monthly expenses. "And here," Walter continued, "is the promissory note Eric insisted wasn't necessary. The one I made him sign anyway." Claire read the document carefully. Clear repayment terms, interest calculations, a schedule that should have begun 18 months ago. He never paid you back, she realized. Not a penny. Just those monthly dividends he mentioned. $200. Like I'm some charity case he supports out of kindness. That night, Eric found Claire reviewing bank statements at the kitchen table. He approached cautiously, recognizing the papers from Walter's folder. "Why are you looking at old documents?" he asked, his tone carefully neutral. Claire looked up at him. In the overhead light, she could see the calculation in his eyes, the same expression he wore during difficult business negotiations. "Because I want to understand what we owe my father," she said. Eric sat down across from her. "We don't owe him anything. That was an investment. Investments carry risk." He knew that. Claire picked up the promissory note. "He made you sign this. Clear repayment terms." Eric's jaw tightened. "That was insurance. In case something went wrong." "Nothing went wrong. The company is thriving." "Then where are the payments?" "I send him money every month. $200. On a $400,000 investment. That's less than 1% annual return." Eric stood up, his patience clearly exhausted. "This is business, Claire. You wouldn't understand the complexities involved." But Claire was beginning to understand something else entirely. She was understanding that her husband had turned their marriage into a performance, their family into a business structure, and her father into a convenient source of capital that could be managed rather than repaid. She looked down at Walter's careful handwriting on the promissory note. "You're right," she said quietly. "I'm starting to understand the complexities." Eric left the kitchen without another word. Claire remained at the table, surrounded by documents that told a story she was only beginning to read. Outside, Tampa's late evening traffic created a gentle hum. Inside the kitchen, a woman began to see her life through the lens of paperwork her father had insisted on keeping. The documents were patient. They would wait for her to be ready. And for the first time in years, Claire felt herself getting ready. Linda Reed's 64th birthday dinner was set for 7 o'clock at Romano's Steakhouse, a dimly lit establishment where the wealthy residents of Tampa celebrated milestones with expensive cuts of meat and imported wine. Claire arrived with Emma and Jake, holding a small gift bag that contained a modest bracelet she had purchased with her carefully budgeted allowance. The restaurant's parking lot buzzed with the usual evening crowd. Claire helped the children out of their sedan, adjusting Jake's collar and smoothing Emma's dress. They looked presentable, she thought, though not as polished as the families emerging from luxury vehicles around them. "Where's Dad?" Emma asked, looking around the parking lot. Claire checked her phone. A text from Eric, "Work emergency. Starting without me. Be there soon." It was the third work emergency this month. As they approached the restaurant entrance, Linda's voice carried across the parking lot. Eric's mother stood beside a gleaming electric vehicle that looked absurdly out of place in a senior birthday celebration. The car was pristine white, its surfaces reflecting the parking lot lights like a mirror. Linda was laughing with theatrical excitement, keys dangling from her manicured fingers as she gestured toward the vehicle. "Can you believe it?" she called out to no one in particular. Jake broke free from Claire's grip and ran toward his grandmother. "Grandma, Dad bought you the electric car." The words hit Claire like cold water. She felt her ears begin to ring, a high-pitched sound that seemed to emanate from somewhere deep inside her skull. She forced her face into a polite mask, the kind of expression she had perfected during years of Eric's business dinners. "Wow, Linda," she managed, her voice carefully controlled. "That's quite new." Linda quickly took Jake's hand and hurried him toward the restaurant entrance. "Kids say silly things," she laughed, the sound too bright and too fast. "You know how children are with their imaginations." But Claire's son was not imaginative about cars. He was 8 years old and obsessed with vehicles, capable of identifying every make and model in any parking lot. When Jake said Dad bought something, he meant Dad bought something. Inside the restaurant, Derek was already seated in a large booth, spreading his arms across the back of the banquet like he owned the establishment. On the table in front of him sat a flagship smartphone, its screen enormous and pristine, still bearing the telltale sheen of recent purchase. "Eric upgraded me," Derek announced as Claire and the children approached. "Company card. Easy as breathing." Claire's fork paused halfway to her mouth. She had been cutting Emma's steak, a ritual of maternal care that usually brought her comfort. Now the simple action felt mechanical, her hands moving while her mind calculated. $80. Her father's medication. Eric's scissors. The hard click of plastic breaking. She looked at Derek's phone. The latest model. Retail value at least $800. Maybe $1,000. She pictured Walter's pill organizer, the weekly ritual of sorting medication into compartments marked with the days of the week. Monday through Sunday, each day representing another step in keeping a 67-year-old heart beating steadily. That's a nice phone, Claire said quietly, her jaw tight but her voice level. Derek grinned. Eric takes care of family. Always has. The word, family, echoed in Claire's mind. She thought about Walter's social security statements, his careful budgeting, his embarrassment when he had to ask for help with copays. She thought about her own household expense spreadsheet, the color-coded system of approval and rejection that governed every purchase in their home. In the restaurant's dim lighting, she began to study rather than simply endure. She excused herself and walked to the restroom, her phone already in her hand. Walter answered on the second ring. "Dad," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "They're spending company money like it's a family fountain." Walter's response came immediately, "Then we follow the paper trail." When Claire returned to the table, Eric had finally arrived, glowing with the satisfaction of someone who had just closed an important deal. He kissed Linda's cheek with ceremonial affection, then settled into the booth without acknowledging Claire's questioning look. "How much?" Claire asked softly, her voice barely audible over the restaurant's ambient noise. Eric smiled, the expression he wore when clients asked about pricing. "It's a lease. Business expense. Tax advantages, you know." Linda raised her wine glass, the crystal catching the overhead light. "My son takes care of me," she announced to the table, though her voice carried far enough for neighboring diners to hear. "Not every woman my age is so fortunate." Claire lowered her gaze, adopting the posture her father had taught her to recognize the moment. When a person decides to stop being polite and start being strategic. The dinner continued around her, filled with laughter and celebration and the kind of casual extravagance that only comes from spending other people's money. Derek showed off his phone's features. Linda described the electric car's impressive acceleration. Eric basked in their gratitude like a man accepting awards for his generosity. But Claire was no longer participating in the performance. She was documenting it. She memorized details: the phone's model number, visible when Derek tilted it toward the light. The electric car's license plate, glimpsed through the restaurant window. Linda's casual mention of the lease terms, delivered between bites of expensive steak. "I need to see the paperwork," Claire said during a lull in the conversation. Eric's smile never wavered, but something shifted behind his eyes. "What paperwork?" "The lease agreement. The phone purchase. Company expenses require documentation, right?" "Of course," Eric replied smoothly. "Everything's properly filed. Company policy." But Claire heard something new in his tone, a careful quality that hadn't been there before. The sound of a man realizing that his audience was no longer simply applauding. The evening ended with hugs and promises to get together soon. Linda drove away in her gleaming electric vehicle. Derek pocketed his expensive phone. Eric shook hands with the restaurant manager and left what Claire suspected was an overly generous tip charged to their joint account. During the drive home, the children chatted about the dinner, their voices fading into background noise as Claire's mind worked through calculations. Electric car lease probably $400 to $600 monthly. Flagship smartphone $800 to $1,200 up front. Birthday dinner for 6 people at an expensive restaurant easily $300. $2,000 in a single evening. Maybe more. Her father's heart medication $80 monthly. Denied. That night, Claire sat in her car in Walter's parking lot for several minutes before going inside. She needed to see her father's face when she told him what she had witnessed. She needed to watch a 67-year-old man absorb the reality that his sacrifice had funded not his daughter's security, but his son-in-law's family patronage system. Walter was waiting for her, the manila folder already open on his kitchen table. "Tell me," he said simply. Claire described the evening methodically: the electric car, the phone, the casual mention of company expenses, the entitled gratitude of people spending money they hadn't earned. Walter listened without interruption, his weathered hands resting on the investment agreement that bore his signature. When Claire finished, Walter was quiet for a long moment. Then he opened his folder to a section she hadn't seen before, revealing bank statements that showed his monthly Social Security deposit alongside the modest withdrawals that represented his careful budgeting. $400,000, he said quietly. From an account that took me 45 years to build. Given to save your family. Used to finance his. Claire felt something colder than anger settling in her chest. It wasn't rage or even indignation. It was clarity. What do we do? She asked. Walter smiled, but it was a different expression than she had seen from him before. It was the smile of a man who had spent his career in aerospace engineering, where precision mattered and documentation could mean the difference between success and catastrophe. We build a case, he said. One receipt at a time. Outside, Tampa's night sky was clear and cool. Inside the small condo, a father and daughter began planning something that felt less like revenge and more like accounting. The numbers, Claire realized, would tell their own story. She just needed to make sure someone was listening. Claire returned home from Linda's birthday dinner with her mind churning through numbers and contradictions. The house felt different somehow, as if the foundation had shifted while she was away. She helped the children through their bedtime routines, her movements automatic while her thoughts remained fixed on electric cars and expensive phones. After Emma and Jake were asleep, she found herself drawn back to Walter's manila folder. The investment agreement lay open where she had left it, but now she noticed something else buried beneath the bank statements: her own professional credentials. The specialized engineering license she had earned before marriage, before children, before becoming a supporting character in Eric's success story. She pulled out the certificate, studying her own name printed in formal typography. Then she opened her laptop and navigated to the state regulatory website, entering her license number into the search field. Her credentials appeared immediately, along with current registration status. But there was something else, a secondary listing that made her blood run cold. Reed Technologies. Qualifying officer. Status active. Employment full-time. Claire stared at the screen until her vision blurred. She blinked hard and read it again. Full-time qualifying officer. At a company where she hadn't worked in over 3 years. In a state that required qualifying officers to maintain actual employment, real oversight, documented hours. I haven't been there, she whispered to the empty room. Not really. Footsteps on the stairs interrupted her shock. Eric appeared in the office doorway, his expression shifting from mild curiosity to sharp irritation when he saw her laptop screen. Why are you in my business files? He demanded. Claire turned the laptop so he could see the regulatory listing. Because my name is in your license compliance. As a full-time employee, and I haven't been full-time anywhere in 3 years. Eric laughed once, a sound devoid of humor. That's old paperwork. Everyone does it. The state doesn't actually audit individual employment records. Claire stood up slowly, her voice dropping to a whisper. So you admit it's false? I admit it's a technicality. A bureaucratic requirement that has nothing to do with actual business operations. But Claire was no longer listening to his explanations. She was remembering Walter's advice: leave proof. She reached for a notebook and wrote 3 lines in her careful handwriting. No timesheets. No payroll. False full-time registration. Then she added a 4th line: EV lease company card. Eric watched her write, his expression cycling through dismissal, concern, and something approaching alarm. Claire, you're overreacting. This is standard practice in our industry. She took photos of her handwritten notes with her phone, then screenshot the regulatory website showing her false employment status. Each image was automatically backed up to her school photos folder. Is Derek's phone standard practice too? She asked. Derek needed a phone for business purposes. What business? He doesn't work for you. Eric's jaw tightened. He helps with networking, business development. It's complicated, like my full-time employment is complicated? The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Walter arrived at Claire's door accompanied by Nina Hart, both carrying folders that looked substantial enough to build a case. Nina's expression was gentle but determined, the look of someone who had seen too many seniors taken advantage of to remain polite about it. We brought documentation, Walter announced, settling at Claire's kitchen table with the same methodical precision he brought to everything. He opened his folder, revealing layers of Social Security statements, Medicare EOBs, and prescription receipts. Not because they were directly related to Eric's business practices, but because they told the story of what sacrifice looked like on paper. 45 years of work, Walter said, pointing to a Social Security earnings history. $400,000 in retirement savings. Given to save your family. Used to fund his mother's car payments. Nina pulled out a folder of her own. I've been helping seniors navigate financial abuse for 8 years, she said. This follows a pattern. Family money flowing upward while family obligations flow downward. Eric burst through the front door without knocking, his face flushed with anger. He had clearly been driving fast, probably breaking traffic laws in his urgency to control this conversation. Walter, sir, he began, his tone artificially respectful. This is all a misunderstanding. Your investment saved the company. I'm grateful every day. Walter looked at Eric with the steady gaze of a man who had spent decades working with precise measurements. Then why did you block my daughter from paying my $80 medication copay? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Eric opened his mouth, closed it, then tried a different approach. That was about budgeting discipline. Teaching financial responsibility. Nothing personal. My heart medication is personal, Walter replied quietly. My daughter's dignity is personal. Your mother's car lease is what, exactly? Claire felt her hands begin to shake, then suddenly stop. A strange calm settled over her as she began arranging documents on the kitchen table. Investment agreement. Board filing documentation. Vehicle lease statement. Phone purchase receipt. Regulatory compliance listing. The papers formed a narrative more damning than any accusation. This isn't an investment, Nina observed, studying the agreement. Investment implies risk and potential loss. This is leverage, and he treated it like entertainment funding. Eric's composure finally cracked. You don't understand business. Any of you. I built something from nothing. You built something from my father's retirement, Claire said, her voice steady and cold. And you used my credentials to keep it legal while excluding me from actual involvement. She stood up, gathering the papers into a neat stack. Tomorrow, I stop being quiet about what I understand. Eric tried intimidation next. He moved closer, using his height advantage the way he did in business negotiations. You'll destroy everything we've built. The kids' future. Our life. But Claire was looking at Nina's folder, at Walter's Medicare statements, at the careful documentation of people trying to survive on fixed incomes. While Eric funded his family's luxury lifestyle. We didn't build anything, she said. You extracted value from my father's sacrifice and called it success. Walter reached across the table and patted Claire's hand. His skin was thin and spotted with age, but his grip was firm. Tomorrow, he said, we stop being extraction targets. Eric left without another word, but Claire could hear him making phone calls from his car in the driveway. Damage control, crisis management, the same skills he used when business deals went bad. But this wasn't a business deal anymore. This was an accounting, and Claire was finally ready to balance the books. That evening, she sat alone in her kitchen, surrounded by documents that told the story of financial abuse dressed as family loyalty. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable, and meticulously documented. She thought about Walter's shaking hands sorting pill organizers. She thought about Eric's casual dismissal of $80 while approving thousands for his family's comfort. She thought about her own name on regulatory documents for work she wasn't performing. The pattern was clear. The solution was simple. The courage required was immense. But for the first time in years, Claire felt herself becoming immense enough to match the task ahead. Before dawn the next morning, Claire sat in her kitchen with a cup of coffee growing cold between her hands. The house was still, wrapped in the particular silence that comes just before a family wakes. She could hear the refrigerator's gentle hum, the distant sound of Tampa's early commuter traffic, and something else, the sound of her own breathing, steady and purposeful for the first time in months. Her laptop screen glowed in the pre-dawn darkness, cursor blinking in an empty email composition window. She had been sitting here for 20 minutes, gathering the courage to type words that would change everything. Walter's voice echoed in her memory leave proof. She remembered the day her father had withdrawn his retirement savings. The image was vivid now, enhanced by stress and significance. Walter's weathered hand trembling slightly as he signed the bank withdrawal forms. The clerk printing documentation with professional efficiency. Walter folding each paper carefully, as if the creases themselves were promises he was making to the future. "I'll save your family," he had said that day, "but you leave proof." Claire opened the folder on her desktop labeled, "School Photos." The irony of the name struck her again, hiding financial evidence among images of soccer games and school plays. But the folder contained everything she needed. She began composing an email with clinical precision. No emotional appeals, no personal grievances, just facts, supported by documentation. Subject: request for compliance review, Reed Technologies. The attachments loaded slowly: qualifying officer misrepresentation, board filing discrepancy, vehicle lease, company card, investment versus loan terms documentation. She typed a brief explanation, keeping her language formal and factual. "I request immediate compliance review of registration status and corporate expense allocation practices." Documentation attached demonstrates significant discrepancies requiring investigation. 3 recipients: the state regulator, the company's bank, and the board of directors that existed mostly on paper but still held legal authority. Her finger hovered over the send button for exactly half a second. Then she clicked. Immediately, her phone began buzzing. Eric's name appeared on the screen, followed by a string of text messages. "What did you do? Answer me now. You're destroying our family. This is insane. Call me back." Claire didn't answer. Instead, she drove to Walter's condo and found him already dressed and ready for his doctor's appointment. His morning routine had become more elaborate as his health required closer monitoring: pills sorted into daily compartments, blood pressure recorded in a notebook. Careful attention to symptoms that might indicate changes in his condition. "How do you feel?" Claire asked as they sat in the medical office waiting room. "Like a man who sent proof to the right people," Walter replied quietly. The nurse called his name, and they walked together into the examination room. Dr. Martinez was efficient and kind, the sort of physician who understood that elderly patients needed extra time to process medical information. "Your heart is responding well to the medication, Drive," Martinez said, reviewing Walter's chart. "But there's been a change in your insurance coverage. The copay for this prescription is increasing to $120 monthly." Walter's shoulders sagged slightly. Claire watched her father absorb the financial impact of staying alive. $120. The price of Derek's monthly phone service. "I'm sorry," Walter whispered, though Claire couldn't determine whether he was apologizing to her or to himself. "Don't be," Claire said firmly. "Your paperwork saved me." That afternoon, Nina connected Claire with attorney Miles King through the Senior Legal Clinic's referral network. Miles operated from a modest office that felt more like a library than a corporate law firm. Its shelves lined with statutes and case precedents rather than luxury decorations. Miles read through the investment agreement with the methodical attention of someone who had seen too many financial abuse cases to be surprised by creativity and exploitation. "This isn't a gift," he said finally. "This isn't even a standard investment. This is leverage disguised as family assistance. And your husband treated it like entertainment funding." Claire nodded, feeling validated for the first time in months. Someone else could see the pattern she had been living inside. "What happens next?" she asked. "We demonstrate that he used your professional credentials illegally, your father's money irresponsibly, and company resources for personal benefit. The evidence is comprehensive." That evening, Eric pounded on Walter's condo door with the desperation of a man watching his carefully constructed world collapse. Claire watched through the peephole, her heart racing but her resolve solid. Eric's voice carried through the door. "Claire, open this door. We need to talk." She could see his face in the security light red with anger and something approaching panic. He alternated between pounding and pressing his ear to the door, trying to detect movement inside. Claire pulled out her phone and sent a single text, all communication through counsel. Eric's pounding intensified. "You can't do this. You're my wife. You live in my house." Claire called building security, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "I need someone removed from the premises. Harassment situation." Within minutes, a security guard appeared in the hallway. Through the peephole, Claire watched Eric transform from aggressive to charming in the span of seconds. "Just a family misunderstanding," he told the guard with practiced sincerity. "My wife is emotional about business decisions. But the guard had clearly seen this performance before. "Sir, you need to leave the property. Residents have requested no contact." Eric left, but not before trying one final manipulation. He looked directly at the peephole and mouthed words Claire could read, "Think about the kids." Claire stepped away from the door and sat beside Walter on his modest couch. The silence that followed felt different from the fearful quiet she had grown accustomed to. This silence felt like protection. "Tomorrow," Walter said, "the lawyers take over." Claire nodded, understanding that she had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. She was no longer Eric's wife asking for fairness. She was an injured party demanding justice. The distinction felt enormous. Outside, Tampa's evening traffic hummed its familiar rhythm. Inside the small condo, a father and daughter sat quietly, listening to the sound of their own breathing and the gentle tick of Walter's wall clock. For the first time in years, time felt like an ally rather than an enemy. The regulator's notice arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered via certified mail to both Reed Technologies and Claire's personal address. The envelope bore official seals and carried the weight of governmental authority. Claire opened her copy at Walter's kitchen table, her hands steady as she read the formal language. Temporary stop work order. Compliance review initiated. All operations suspended pending investigation of registration discrepancies and corporate governance violations. She placed the notice beside Walter's pill organizer, the contrast striking her immediately. Official documentation protecting them, positioned next to the daily medication routine that Eric had dismissed as unworthy of $80. "Today," she said to her father, "paperwork protects us." Eric's response was immediate and explosive. He appeared at Claire's front door within an hour, his face flushed with rage barely contained beneath a veneer of injured righteousness. His car sat in the driveway with the engine still running, as if he had driven straight from the office without consideration for traffic laws or personal safety. "You're a stay-at-home mom," he spat when Claire answered the door. "You don't understand business regulations. You can't do this to me." Claire stood in the doorway, not inviting him inside. "I'm the qualifying officer whose name you used to stay legally compliant." "I understand enough." Eric tried to push past her, but Claire held her ground. His eyes darted to the living room, searching for evidence of her activities: documents, lawyers' cards. Anything that might tell him how much damage had been done. "I built this company from nothing," he said, his voice rising. "Everything we have comes from my work. Everything you have comes from my father's retirement savings and my professional credentials," Claire replied evenly. "Your work was managing other people's assets and calling it entrepreneurship." Miles King filed for emergency board action that same afternoon. The board meeting convened in a rented conference room at a modest business center. The kind of space used for depositions and arbitrations rather than corporate celebrations. Walter entered the room with careful dignity, his best suit pressed and his folder of documentation organized with military precision. At 67, he looked tired but unbreakable, a man who had spent 45 years building something real and wasn't ashamed to defend it. Derek slouched in his chair, occasionally checking his expensive phone as if the meeting were an inconvenience. Linda sat rigidly upright, her face set in lines of disapproval directed entirely at Claire. Eric dominated the room's energy, talking over board members, dismissing questions, and radiating the aggressive confidence that had served him well in business negotiations. Miles began methodically. "The investment agreement signed 3 years ago contains clear repayment terms. Principal amount $400,000. Interest rate 3% annually. Repayment schedule monthly installments beginning 18 months post-investment." Claire slid the original agreement across the conference table. The board members' local business owners, recruited more for legitimacy than oversight, examined the document with growing attention. "This was structured as a loan," continued Miles, "but treated as a gift. Mr. Reed has made no payments toward principal or interest. Instead, he's distributed company assets to family members while claiming financial constraints prevented repayment." Eric exploded. "It was my company, my risk, my leadership that saved everything." Walter spoke for the first time, his voice quiet but carrying clearly across the room. "It was my retirement savings that prevented bankruptcy. Your leadership was funded by my 45 years of work." Claire presented the evidence systematically. Electric vehicle lease agreement $540 monthly, charged to company accounts. Derek's smartphone purchase $895, categorized as business equipment. Birthday dinner expenses, travel costs, and miscellaneous family expenditures all funded by corporate resources, while Walter's medication copays were deemed unaffordable. Linda finally spoke, her voice sharp with defensive anger. Eric takes care of his family. That's what good sons do. Claire looked directly at her mother-in-law. He punished my father's medication while funding your car lease. That's not family care. That's selective generosity with stolen money. The board reviewed Miles's forensic accounting report. 37 separate instances of family expenditures charged as business expenses. Company credit cards used for personal travel. Linda's vehicle registration showing Reed Technologies as the lessee. The vote came swiftly. Eric removed as acting CEO pending litigation. Company assets frozen except for essential operations. Claire appointed as interim management authority with Walter as financial oversight consultant. Eric's face drained of color, the transformation shocking in its completeness. For the first time since Claire had known him, he looked genuinely small, not just defeated, but diminished. "You'll regret this," he said, his voice hollow but still carrying undertones of threat. "I'll make sure you regret destroying our family." Claire gathered her documents, each paper representing hours of careful documentation and years of suppressed recognition. "I already lived regret," she said, standing to leave. "Now I live with records." Walter rose slowly, his folder clutched against his chest like armor. "Today, my investment finally protected my daughter instead of funding her exploitation." As they walked out of the conference room, Claire felt the weight of the documents in her briefcase. They were heavier than she expected, not physically, but emotionally. They carried the substance of justice rather than the lightness of hope. Behind them, Eric sat alone at the conference table, staring at his phone as if it might provide some digital solution to his analog problems. Derek had already left. Linda remained, but her earlier confidence had evaporated into something approaching bewilderment. How did this happen? They could hear Linda asking Miles, as if legal consequences were unexpected events rather than predictable outcomes. Outside the building, Walter paused on the sidewalk, his breathing slightly labored from the emotional intensity of the meeting. "Are you okay?" Claire asked, taking his arm. Walter smiled, not with happiness, but with satisfaction. "I'm okay. For the first time in 3 years, I'm okay." The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot. Claire helped her father into her car, then sat behind the steering wheel for a moment before starting the engine. She thought about Eric's threat, Linda's bewilderment, Derek's casual dismissal of consequences. She thought about the stop work order, the board's vote, the careful documentation that had finally spoken louder than manipulation. Most of all, she thought about Walter's retirement account, empty now, but transformed from vulnerability into power through the simple act of demanding proof. Justice, she realized, wasn't about revenge. It was about accurate accounting. And for the first time in years, the books were finally balanced. 1 year later, the Hillsborough County Courthouse hallway was cold, sterile, and unforgiving, the kind of space designed to strip away pretense and focus attention on facts. Fluorescent lighting cast harsh shadows across the polished floors, and the air carried the particular silence that precedes significant legal proceedings. Walter sat on a wooden bench, clutching his familiar manila folder. Inside were Social Security letters, medical receipts, and the original wire transfer confirmation documents that represented more than financial transactions. They were proof of sacrifice, evidence of a 67-year-old man who had chosen his daughter's future over his own security. Claire sat beside him, wearing her best business suit and carrying a briefcase that contained 18 months of careful legal preparation. Miles King had organized everything with the precision of a man who understood that elder financial abuse cases required overwhelming documentation to achieve justice. "Are you ready?" Miles asked, approaching their bench with his own files and the calm confidence of an attorney who had built his case on irrefutable evidence. Walter nodded, his weathered hands steady on his folder. "I've been ready since the day I signed that check." The courtroom was smaller than Claire had expected, with wooden pews and fluorescent lighting that made everything appear slightly yellow. Eric sat at the defendant's table with his attorney, a sharp-featured woman in an expensive suit who specialized in white-collar defense. Eric had lost weight during the legal proceedings. His clothes, while still well-tailored, hung differently on his frame. The confidence that had once filled every room he entered seemed to have evaporated, replaced by the careful posture of a man managing his public image under scrutiny. Linda sat in the gallery behind Eric, her expression set in permanent disapproval. Derek was notably absent. He had distanced himself from the proceedings. Once the criminal investigation began examining his phone purchase and other family benefits. Miles began with the timeline, presenting each document as evidence of a systematic pattern of financial exploitation disguised as investment opportunity. Your Honor, Miles said, addressing Judge Patricia Hernandez, this case involves the deliberate misuse of elder resources, fraudulent professional registration, and corporate assets conversion. The defendant used his wife's credentials to maintain legal compliance while excluding her from actual employment, and treated his father-in-law's retirement savings as a personal enrichment fund. Eric's attorney attempted to frame the situation as a business dispute between family members, unfortunate but not criminal. My client made every effort to maintain family relationships while managing a struggling company, she argued. These are civil matters, not criminal violations. Judge Hernandez reviewed the forensic accounting report with careful attention. Her expression remained neutral, but Claire noticed how she lingered on certain pages, particularly the sections detailing Derek's phone purchase and Linda's vehicle lease payments. Mr. Reed, Judge Hernandez said, looking directly at Eric, this investment agreement contains clear repayment terms. Principal amount of $400,000, 3% annual interest, monthly payments beginning 18 months after investment. Can you explain why no payments were made during the specified period? Eric stood, his voice carrying the remnants of his former persuasiveness. Your Honor, the company was still recovering from initial challenges. I prioritized operational stability over debt service, which benefited all stakeholders in the long term. Yet during this same period, Judge Hernandez continued, consulting the report. Company funds were used to lease a luxury vehicle for your mother and purchase expensive electronics for your brother. How do you reconcile operational constraints with family expenditures? Eric's composure cracked slightly. Those were business development expenses, networking tools, standard corporate practices. Walter asked to speak. Judge Hernandez nodded, and Walter stood slowly, his folder still clutched against his chest. Your Honor, Walter said, his voice quiet but carrying clearly across the courtroom, I worked 45 years as an aerospace technician. I understand the difference between investment and exploitation. When my daughter needed help, I gave everything I had saved. When I needed $80 for heart medication, her husband cut up her credit card. The courtroom was silent except for the gentle hum of air conditioning and the distant sound of Tampa traffic beyond the courthouse walls. Eric's attorney tried one final argument. Mr. Price was aware that investments carry risks. He understood the potential for loss when he chose to invest in Reed Technologies. Miles stood for rebuttal. This wasn't an investment carrying normal business risks. This was a loan with clear repayment terms that were ignored while the borrower enriched his extended family. Mr. Price didn't lose his retirement savings to market forces. They were diverted to fund luxury purchases while his medical needs were dismissed as financially irresponsible. Judge Hernandez reviewed the evidence one final time, her attention focused on the investment agreement with its clear repayment schedule, and the forensic accounting report showing systematic diversion of company resources. The court finds clear evidence of financial elder abuse, Judge Hernandez announced. The defendant systematically violated investment terms while using company resources for personal benefit. The corporate structure was manipulated to avoid repayment obligations while funding family luxuries. The ruling was comprehensive company equity divided 50-50 between Claire and Walter. Eric permanently removed from all management positions. Additional findings supporting civil liability, with potential criminal exposure pending ongoing investigation by the state attorney's office. Eric's face went completely white. His attorney whispered urgently in his ear, but he seemed unable to process her words. Linda covered her face with her hands. Furthermore, Judge Hernandez continued, The defendant's use of his wife's professional credentials without proper employment constitutes regulatory fraud. The licensing board will receive copies of these findings for their own disciplinary proceedings. Eric finally found his voice. Please, Your Honor. Let me make this right. I can pay back the money. My children need their father. Judge Hernandez looked at him with the expression she reserved for defendants who discovered consequences only after facing accountability. Mr. Reed, your children needed a father who demonstrated integrity rather than financial manipulation. Today's ruling ensures they'll have that opportunity through proper adult supervision. Claire felt Walter's hand squeeze hers as the judge's gavel fell. The sound echoed through the courtroom with finality. Outside the courthouse, Miles shook Walter's hand with genuine warmth. Today, Mr. Price, the paperwork protected you instead of being used against you. Walter looked at the courthouse building, its windows reflecting the late afternoon sun. My investment finally paid dividends, he said quietly. Not money, justice. Claire hugged her father on the courthouse steps, feeling the weight of legal documents in her briefcase and the lightness of vindication in her chest. Behind them, Eric emerged from the building with his attorney. His phone already pressed to his ear as he began the process of appealing decisions and managing consequences. But his voice lacked the confident authority that had once commanded rooms full of business associates. Linda approached Claire cautiously. This will destroy him, she said, her voice thick with tears. Claire looked at her former mother-in-law with something approaching compassion. He destroyed himself. We just stopped enabling it. As they walked to their cars, Walter paused to catch his breath. The legal proceedings had been emotionally exhausting, but his posture remained upright, dignified. Are you satisfied? Claire asked. Walter considered the question seriously. Satisfied feels too small. I'm restored. For the first time since I signed that check, I feel like a man who protected his family instead of a victim who funded his own exploitation. The drive home was quiet, both of them processing the magnitude of what had just concluded. Justice had been served, but it carried the weight of broken relationships and shattered illusions. Still, as Claire helped Walter up the steps to his condo, she realized that some relationships deserved to be broken. Some illusions needed shattering. And sometimes, the most loving thing a person could do was demand accurate accounting from those who claimed to care about them. 6 months after the courthouse victory, Claire walked through the offices of Reed Technologies as its chief executive officer. The transformation was subtle but significant, the same desks and computers, but a different energy. The steady rhythm of keyboards and phone conversations carried an undertone of stability that had been missing during Eric's chaotic leadership. She paused at the reception desk where Maria, the office manager, was organizing monthly performance reviews. The reviews were real now, not the theatrical exercises Eric had conducted to impress clients, but genuine assessments designed to recognize hard work and identify areas for growth. Claire's office still felt foreign sometimes. The desk that Eric had commanded like a throne now served as a workspace for careful decision-making rather than dramatic pronouncements. She had replaced his motivational posters with simple family photos and a framed copy of Walter's original investment agreement, not as a trophy, but as a reminder of the responsibility she carried. Her first executive decision had been employee performance bonuses. Real money for the staff members who had maintained operations while Eric had focused on family enrichment projects. She signed each bonus check personally, remembering how Eric had treated employees as interchangeable resources, rather than human beings with families and aspirations. The company credit card sat in her desk drawer, no longer a weapon of control but a tool of transparency. Every purchase required documentation. Every expense was justified to the board. The card itself looked ordinary, just plastic and magnetic strips, but it represented accountability in a way that Eric had never understood. Her second major decision involved Walter's transportation needs. Not a luxury vehicle like Linda's electric car, but a safe, reliable sedan appropriate for a 70-year-old man with heart conditions. Walter had protested initially, embarrassed by what he saw as charity. "Dad," Claire had said, "you invested in my life. I'm paying you back in peace of mind." The car was practical, efficient, and paid for with documented company funds as part of Walter's consulting compensation. He used it primarily for medical appointments and grocery shopping. But Claire knew it represented something larger, proof that family care could be genuine rather than performative. Linda had sent a text message 3 weeks earlier. Not quite an apology, but an acknowledgement that families make mistakes. Claire had read it twice and then deleted it without responding. Some bridges, once burned, were better left as ashes. Derek had called twice asking for temporary help with rent payments. Claire had listened to his voicemails, the same entitled tone, the same assumption that family meant automatic financial support. She deleted those messages too. Eric continued his attempts at contact from his new apartment across town. Different phone numbers, different email addresses, always with the same underlying message: their separation was temporary. Their children needed their father, reconciliation was still possible. Claire's response had evolved from detailed explanations to simple silence. She no longer felt obligated to justify her decisions to the man who had turned their marriage into a business arrangement with unequal power dynamics. The children were adjusting better than she had expected. Emma, now 9, had stopped asking when Daddy was coming home. Jake, 10, had begun referring to weekend visits as daddy time, rather than normal family life. They seemed to understand, in the way children often do, that the household had become calmer and more predictable. One afternoon, Claire met Nina at the senior center to thank her for the support that had made everything possible. The building buzzed with its usual activities: bridge games, exercise classes, educational seminars about Medicare and Social Security. "You didn't ruin a man," Nina said as they sat in the sunshine room overlooking a small garden. "You stopped a financial predator who happened to wear a wedding ring." Claire nodded, accepting the truth of Nina's observation. Eric's behavior had followed predictable patterns of elder financial abuse: isolation, control, guilt manipulation, and systematic asset conversion. The marriage license hadn't made it love, it had provided camouflage. That evening, Claire sat in her home office reviewing quarterly reports. The company was performing better than it had under Eric's leadership, though the improvements were measured in sustainable growth rather than dramatic expansions funded by borrowed capital. Above her computer monitor, she had pinned Walter's old handwritten note, "Leave proof." The words looked different now, not bitter or defensive, but practical. A boundary marker. A reminder that trust required verification and love demanded accountability. Her phone rang. Eric's new number appeared on the screen, the 4th different number he had used that month. Claire watched it ring, her thumb hovering over the answer button. Then she pressed block instead. "Done," she whispered to the empty room. The silence that followed felt different from the fearful quiet that had characterized her marriage. This silence was comfortable, chosen, protective. It was the sound of a woman who no longer needed permission to prioritize her own well-being. Walter called an hour later, his voice warm and relaxed in a way she hadn't heard since before his heart problems began. "How was your day?" he asked, the simple question carrying layers of caring that Eric had never managed. "Productive," Claire replied, looking at her reflection in the darkened office window. "Peaceful." "Good," Walter said. "Peace is what your mother would have wanted for you." After they hung up, Claire remained at her desk for several minutes, listening to the gentle sounds of her house settling into evening. Emma and Jake were finishing homework in their rooms. The dishwasher hummed through its cycle. The refrigerator clicked on and off with mechanical reliability. These were the sounds of stability. Of a household organized around the needs of its actual inhabitants rather than the ego of its loudest member. Claire thought about the investment agreement, the court proceedings, the careful documentation that had transformed vulnerability into power. She thought about Walter's sacrifice, Nina's support, Miles's legal expertise. Most of all, she thought about the moment when she had finally stopped asking for fairness and started demanding justice. Life, she realized, doesn't end just because it breaks once. What falls apart can be the very place where we learn to stand again. If this story gave even a small moment of strength to someone out there, then everything she went through means something today. If this resonated with you, please like and subscribe, and share a piece of your own story in the comments below. Your words might become the seed of the next chapter we create together. Thank you for spending this time.